Okay, this video is 7-4, and what we ultimately want to get to is solving a polynomial equation, and by using the method of GCF to get it factored form. So we're still in 7-4. This is like a recap page. So if you want to title your notes, and the key word here is we're solving. I have that written twice, I guess for emphasis. Number 1, so we have an equation. This is what it would look like on a test or a quiz. Looks like that. What do you do? Step 1, is it set to 0? So I have an equation, and then it has an equal sign, 0. That means it is set to 0. Of course, I just lost lead. Oh, here we go. Now, it needs to be in factored form. This is not in factored form. I can factor it by the method of GCF. You're going to learn 2 methods this year on factoring. GCF, or when it's in a trinomial. This one can be factored by GCF. They have a common factor of a 5, because 5 and 10, 5 goes into both of those. And they both have 1x in common. So 5x is the GCF, and that goes on the outside of the parentheses, and you want to undistribute that from both of those terms. So 5x times what gives you 5x squared? X. Then 5x times a positive 2 is what gave you the 10x. These 2 lines right here should always be equivalent. So like if I distribute this in, I should always get the line above. Now that it's in factored form, I can use the zero product property and set each factor to 0. This is a factor, and this is a factor. I'm going to set those 2 factors equal to 0 and solve. 5x equals 0, and x plus 2 can equal 0. So when I divide this side by 5, I get one solution, x can equal 0. And if I subtract 2 to both sides over here, I get a solution, x equals -2. Number 2. So I'm going to solve this polynomial equation. Is it set equal to 0? Yes, because I have blah, 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 equal sign 0. That means it's set to 0. Is it in factored form? The answer is no. You need parentheses for factored form. I can factor this by GCF because these 2 terms have something in common. 3 goes into both of those numbers, and they both have 1x. 3x times what gives you 12x squared? Hopefully you thought 4x. And 3x distributed to a -1 is what give you -3x. I take these 2 factors and I set them equal to 0 because of the zero product property. Oops. And I get 2 solutions. X equals 0 and x equals 1/4. Those are the 2 numbers that would make this equation true. Next one. Is the equation set equal to 0? I have equation, equal sign, not 0. So I just have to move this over to the other side by subtracting 30x to both sides, and now I have 8x squared minus 30x, because those are not like terms, equals 0. Now it's set to 0. Now I can factor it. I can factor it by GCF because 8 and 30 have a common factor of 2, and they both have an x in common. 2x distributed to 4x is what would have given me 8x squared. And 2x distributed to a minus 15 is what would give me minus 30x. Now that it's in factored form, I can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. X equals 0 is one solution. And 4x, add 15 to both sides, divide by 4, 15/4. That's an acceptable answer. It's a fraction. It's in reduced form. One more problem. So we're going to go to the top of the next page. Copy this into your notes. Find the x-intercepts. So we have a graph. It's a U-shaped graph. It's the type of function that we're going to be learning in Chapter 8. Find the x-intercept. We've learned all year long that the x-intercepts are when y equals 0. Essentially, you're trying to find out what is this number and what is this number. Sometimes, depending on the graph that you're given, you might be able to answer this without doing much work, just by looking at the graph. But I don't really have any numbers on here, so we have to kind of do a little bit of work to find those answers. The x-intercepts when y is 0. So in this function, I can replace the y with a 0. And now I have a polynomial equation set equal to 0. It's not in factored form yet, and then I'll be able to find them, my solutions. I can factor this by GCF because there's two terms and they have something in common. They both have an x in common. So I can factor out that GCF of an x to get x minus 10. So I have x times x minus 10. And that step above would have been x squared minus 10x. They're equivalent. Now it's set equal to 0. It's in factored form. I take each factor and I set it equal to 0. There's one solution. And x minus 10 equals 0, so I'm going to add 10 to both sides. I have two solutions. But what that means for the graph is this point is at 0, 0. Your x came out to be 0 when the y was 0. And this point must be at 10, 0. Your x came out to a 10 when the y is a 0. So hopefully that helps a little bit with our section 7-4 wrap up.